Well, let's bring you more now on that prison situation, the problems that have emerged at Birmingham, and of course it raises questions about the privatisation of some prisons. Let's talk to author and former prisoner Jonathan Robinson and Bettina Jordan Barber, a senior consultant for prison consultants who works with prisoners and their families, and a former MOD strategist who went to jail for 12 months for leaking stories to The Sun. Good to see you both.
Good evening.
I've got to ask, do you mind that past being now part of your present and future, the fact it is a key part of what you do now?
It's a key part of what I do. Obviously, you know, I'm very sorry for what happened. It is what it is.
Is it a sense of you... I mean, do you, Jonathan, own it rather than try and hide it? Is that the way to deal with it?
I'm still very ashamed of the behaviour that quite rightly landed me in prison. I stole money from my employer. I've never once complained about being sent to prison. I got sentenced to 15 months and in fact did 17 weeks, 7 in a closed prison, Bedford, and then 10 in Halsey Bay, where the rehabilitation was sitting around sunbathing.
Well, heck. Well, it is nice to see that there is, you know, there is life and success after prison. That is important because this is meant to be about reform. It's meant about reforming characters, reforming people, Bettina, isn't it?
It's what it should be about, and that's actually what we as a country and as a society and as the Minister of Justice need to actually determine. What is it we want? Do we want revenge policies, because clearly they're not working too well at the moment, or do we actually want restorative justice?
Well, I mean, that is what we're told by politicians. I mean, we have been told that for a long time, in many respects. I mean, that clearly is not the sort of situation which is going to emerge when you've got a prison in the state that Birmingham is in.
Unfortunately, you could pretty much Tipp-Ex out Birmingham and put plenty of other establishments, and you'll see the same sort of damning reports from Peter Clarke. I think
well, it's not even just Peter Clarke. The Minister of Justice's own performance targets for 2017 to 2018 stipulate that 46% of the prisons across the United Kingdom are of concern. So when, you know, Rory Stewart has said this morning and on other interviews that, you know, Birmingham is shocking, Peter Clarke said this morning he thought Liverpool was bad. Then he went to Birmingham. Next week he'll go somewhere else and it'll be an even worse tale. OK, look,
how do you think... I mean, you said, Jonathan, that you could Tipp-Ex Birmingham out and put any prison name in there. How do you think a prison gets in this state? Is it purely down to management, to bad management, or to lack of funding, or what? I mean, how would you...
The prisons that I visit now as a guest, I sort of have a litmus test, private or public sector, within about the first 10 minutes, a bit like going to a new restaurant for the first time as to how it's going to be. A few summers back, I visited one of London's reform prisons, and there were 6 uniformed staff in the gatehouse reading newspapers. That prison failed my litmus test. Prisons with a good governor, an innovative governor, like a captain of a ship, like Jack Hawkins in the black and white films, that good leadership, I've noticed, tends to filter down to the staff and to the inmates. Prison officer training is still only something like 8 weeks. In Norway, it's 3 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Fundamentally, though, what really hit me as a customer of the prison system, expecting Shawshank, my knees were knocking, what really got to me, and I'd never anticipated this, was the enthusiasm and potential in a great many inmates that really knocked me for 6. And I think you'd be surprised how much so many prisoners want to do stuff. Purposeful activity has only risen something like 3 or 4% in the last 5 or 6 years. There are pockets of really, really good work going on in prisons. Best example of which is the Clink charity, who run the prison restaurants, which are top-rated in TripAdvisor.
Yeah.
The inmates that have been through that programme, who are working 9 till 5, trained properly, and have got work when they leave, the reoffending rate of that is only something like 6%.
But the meaningful increase in rehabilitative work of the 3 or 4% that you quote from the last 5 or 6 years directly correlates, and to come back to your original question, from 2010 to 2016, The Minister of Justice, second only to the Department of Work and Pensions, saw the greatest budget cuts from any government department. Over a third of their budgets went. I mean, the current leadership there have Chris Grayling not to thank for an awful lot of stuff. Between 2010 and 2016, they lost 7,000 prison officers. That's experience, seasoned, trained prison officers who could read a wing and read the mood of the inmates. 2,500, as Rory Stewart confirmed this morning, they've managed to put back in. That's a drop in the ocean. And those 2,500, they're young, they're inexperienced. They got rid of the ones that were going to cost them the most. So those were the ones that had all of the experience, had the time served, were able to keep people going. 7,000 prison officers. And Peter Clarke said the last 5 years demonstrate a direct correlation between the cuts from the Minister of Justice and the effect on the shop floor.
But if this is going to be, and we don't know, but if this is going to be used as an example and to say perhaps we can, even if it's done quietly, look at changing the system somewhat. It's a case of what do we change it to? I know you're quite keen on the Dutch system, Bettina, aren't you?
Yes, and we're also keen on there's something called an OASIS report that every prisoner has when they go into prison. It's conducted on them by prison staff, and it assesses your risk of reoffending. So actually you need to start looking at, do you sentence the person to the highest sentence you can give them in line with sentencing guidelines, or do you sentence them to effect? So what I mean by that is, why give somebody a 6-year sentence when 4 will do the job? 4 will still see them, penalised, maybe lose their house, all the things that come with it. And we've got to start being clever. If someone has been assessed by the prison service themselves as having a 0% or between 2 and 5% chance of reoffending, we've got other systems we can use. We've got home detention curfew. They're equally punitive. They're just different. And we've got to start managing the system. I'm going to be really interested to know where Birmingham are going to send the 300 prisoners that they're apparently going to be moving.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to put them.
Well, this is the issue. So down from 1,200 to 900 as a result of these changes are now being brought in. We know there is an overcrowding problem across the board with prisons.
We've got a prison estate that is capable of managing 75,000 at best, and it's holding 83,000 at the moment.
86,000, I'm told, according to our latest figures. 86,000 in 121 prisons.
OK, I got from the Times 83,000. But that's predicted on the trajectory. It is quite dramatic up until 2022.
Yeah. But there is, of course, this huge argument that short sentences don't work. I think everyone from all sides of the House in Westminster, the right wing and left wing of all sides, are all in agreement that our current prison system isn't working. And whilst a lot of rhetoric has come from the new Justice Minister, David Gwark, and the new Prisons Minister, Rory Stewart, I certainly believe they're making the right noises. Let's first of all hope that Mrs May keeps them in their jobs, because we've had 7 or 8 of them in the last... it's like changing socks. 6
since 2010. Not even the England football team's had as many managers.
But that is important, is it? Do you think to actually have people at the helm? You think?
Yes.
Strategically, coherence. Everything is lacking, and we're constantly seeing a department that is treating symptoms, not causes.
And what about there was an investment announced for 10 prisons of £1 million each last week to change some security things, a few more people being brought in, better security. A lot of it was to try and keep drugs out the system.
I think it's 6 million across the 10.
Part of that rhetoric was the planned purchase of machinery that will detect whether or not you have drugs or mobile phones or illicit contraband about your person.
But that again is treating symptoms, not causes.
When I arrived as a customer at HMP Bedford, and we were about 6 new prisoners, we were searched, but no more really than if you're jumping on a Ryanair flight. In the corner of the room was what I now know to be called a boss chair, where if you sit in it, it'll detect whether you've got anything about your person. None of us were invited, ordered to sit in this chair. The prisons that I visit in my after-prison life, I would estimate I only get searched 20% of the time. So you can you can chuck all this money at buying new kit, but if everyone was searched properly and I mean everyone, from idiots like me visiting prisons, to new prisoners, to politicians, to staff. If everyone was searched, for starters, that would bring down the stuff that comes in.
It would bring down what's coming in, but it doesn't treat the causes of.
I need to talk about spice.
Oh yeah.
When I was in jail in 2011, spice, and I don't and never have had any interest in drugs, but spice was just starting, and there were inmates smoking it at my open prison. And I'd notice a few of them would behave like they'd had a few gin and tonics, but I didn't see anyone getting nasty. But I understand now the people who manufacture these artificial drugs, you know, you could give your granny spice and she'd turn into a monster. So when you've got a system that's allowing, for whatever reasons, via apathy, I suppose, for all these drugs to come in, the effect that it has on people, especially disturbed young people, is, I believe, one of the reasons why we are having so many of these awful assaults, prisoner on prisoner, prisoner on staff, etc.
Well, and here's an additional irony. The governor that they've just parachuted into Birmingham has just come from Swaleside, where 2 nights ago, I mean, Swaleside is known as Stab City. I've got a number of clients there who've had any number of problems because of the levels of violence and drugs that are available at Swaleside. They had someone die 2 nights ago in a suspected spice overdose.
So, look, I mean, you mentioned about changing the underlying culture when it comes to drugs. What is pushing that?
You've got some people who are drug addicts before they even get to prison. Then you've got those who, through boredom or any other number of causes, can become an addict once they're there. Somewhere like Birmingham, which is a local prison and has a lot of people on remand, I mean, it is a car crash waiting to happen, even with the best leadership, frankly, but certainly with no funds and no budgets available to make sure people are well looked after. It's difficult. You know, you've got to have educational programs. If you've got someone on remand, their life can be as badly affected, even if they end up being acquitted and not convicted and not serving a full sentence, as you have with someone who may have a conviction. They could still come out to a completely ruined life, have to start again, might end up turning to crime again because it's their only method. They've still got to eat. They've still got to feed themselves. It's a merry-go-round system, and we're still spending over £15 billion a year as a country, taxpayers' money, on recidivism.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in all of this, there will be some people watching saying, I don't care what conditions are like. It's meant to be a punishment. We want them out of society. Why should we be so concerned about this?
I get that, but through the screaming and shouting I do, I actually think most of the public wants to see people who have broken the law, who are sent to prison, punished and fixed without sounding crass, so when they get out they don't do it again. And that's not what we're doing at the moment.
No.
We have the highest reoffending rates in the EU, and yes, reoffending costs £15 billion. My point that I've been going on and on and on about is, why can't we do more with inmates whilst we've got them? Locking someone up in a cell with a telly, so they get the cycle of Stenders, Coronation Street, Emmerdale, and not doing anything much with them, ain't going to fix them. I remember saying to Chris Grayling when he was Justice Minister, if you have a playing up car and lock it in the garage and ignore it, it ain't going to fix itself.
Well, and likewise, you know, if you kick a dog for long enough, it's going to bite. You know, your average Daily Mail reader that generally tends to be of the hang them and flog them brigade, normally, if you actually explain what it means to them and explain in full terms what the impact of a conviction is, never mind a custodial sentence, on somebody's life, if they when they've actually understood it, they will turn around and eventually say, actually they've been punished, and I don't really want to. If you say to someone, would you rather your taxpayers' money went on reoffending rates or the social care bill, I think I know what their answer would be.
And you've got to remember also that something like 99.7% of people in our prisons will get out and be your neighbour. And we want them to come out a better person, having been properly trained or educated or taught to read. Half the prison
Yeah.
population has the reading level of an 11-year-old or less.
If that, yeah.
It's just one huge missed opportunity.
Well, look, it's fascinating to talk to both of you. Jonathan, Bettina, thank you both very much indeed.
My pleasure.
You're welcome.